So I've been in this particular field of work for about 18 years. The most difficult is when there's a real disconnect. If you see a need and something you're passionate about, then go do it, because the path will unfold. Learning relationships, co-learning, rather than my delivering content. That co-learning was what I really liked. And I think that was when I knew that I would always want to be a teacher. So that's the fun one, is that middle school girls are fantastic. They are joyful. It is a tremendously vulnerable time, but it's also a wonderful time. So middle school girls rock. I'm Maureen Burgess, and I am at the Hewitt School, which is a K-12 girls' school on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. I've been in this particular field of work for about 18 years. My current job is I'm the head of the middle school, grades 5 through 8, as well as the K-12 Dean of Teaching and Learning. So I do a lot of the academic curricular planning side, and beginning in July of this year, I will be moving into a new role at Hewitt as Assistant Head of School for Learning and Innovation. My job is different every day, but my primary responsibility as head of middle school is to ensure that we're meeting our commitments to our families and to our faculty and to our girls, most importantly, in terms of our school's mission and our educational priorities. In some ways, that's also what I do as the Dean of Teaching and Learning. It's unusual that someone would be in both of these roles, and that's why I am transitioning out. My duties range from making sure that everything's running smoothly day to day, and I have a team of folks who work with me. I do a lot of parent work, talking to them about their individual daughter's experience. I have a support team that I work closely with in terms of the emotional health and well-being of students. As the dean, I do the schedule. All of the department chairs, academic department chairs report to me. I oversee our faculty growth, evaluation, and renewal program, our professional development program, a lot of different things. It's quite a few duties. I would say that happened in graduate school, because I did teach my own classes. I wasn't a TA. I mean, in that sense, I was completely responsible for curriculum design, teaching, grading, all of that. And when I initially began that, I was pursuing my doctorate in English and thinking I wanted to be a college professor. And honestly, my experience in college, I had wonderful teachers, but you go into grad school because you love literature and you want to learn about literature and you want to learn at this time was high theory, which I wasn't as quite as taken with. But I wasn't really necessarily thinking I wanted to be a teacher, but more I wanted to live the life of academia and the life of the mind. Time in the classroom was what was most exciting to me, and those learning relationships, co-learning, rather than my delivering content. That co-learning was what I really liked. And I think that was when I knew that I would always want to be a teacher. They've always been really supportive. Both of my parents worked right after high school. My mother also went to college. I was really the first person in the family to have that kind of more, privileged opportunity of graduating, always knowing I would go to college and that my parents would pay for it, and so I was able to do that. So I think mainly they just want to make sure that I got a job. I have to look at my schedule because my schedule is pretty busy. It might be easier to describe my day so far. Today I started with meeting with our teacher who is having a challenge with a particular student who doesn't think she needs direction. She's a star already, and her mother had reached out to him, so he popped in to talk with me and get some guidance, and I talked to him and then directed him to the next person who I think could be helpful. After that, I met with a faculty member about a professional development opportunity that he's been accepted for. So we talked about how great that was and how the school is happy to support that because I run the PD budget. Had a quick phone call with a potential candidate for a position next year to plan her visit. Then I met with another faculty member from the science department I'm creating a learning and innovation team and who's interested in that. So we talked about that and what her role would be if she were to join that team. Then I ran downstairs to meet with our director of advancement and the head of the upper school to talk about our parent onboarding process, new family onboarding process, and how we can do a better job with that. Then I talked to the third grade team about a classroom reorganization next year, and the head of the lower school. I often do have visitors from outside. Last week I had folks from 2 different schools in who wanted to visit with our faculty, and I arranged those visits. Later today, I know I'm meeting with the middle school advisors at 3:30, and because we have an advisory program, and one of my team members directs that, but this is a meeting to talk about, we had parent conferences last week that our students lead, and it'll look completely different tomorrow. What I love most are the girls. I have to say I love educating young people. I've been an educator since I started at Ohio State when I was 23 in the graduate program. I've grown deeply committed to the work that still very much needs to be done for girls in this country, as well as around the globe, but even in a country such as ours where there is access to public education, and we've gone through a second wave feminist movement in the 70s to 80s, and the sort of opening up opportunities and breaking through, quote unquote, the glass ceiling. The reality is, roughly 5% of Fortune 500 company CEOs are women. It's still, when you look at who's in the boardroom versus there's still tremendous work to be done. We see ourselves as trying to be countercultural in terms of the messages that girls and young women are receiving today. That's the best thing about my job. I think working with families when there's a challenge. Our tuition is high, and so like all independent schools, we do work hard with our families to help them understand that they have chosen us because of our expertise and our mission, and so they need to trust us. But sometimes there can be different levels of expectations, particularly, I'd say, academically around the college process and parents' hopes and aspirations for their children's academic record. But probably even more so than that, and particularly in my role as head of the middle school the last 6 years, is there's a real crisis, in growing crisis amongst high-achieving girls and mental health. I see it creeping down more and more into middle school, the kinds of issues that we're partnering with families around in terms of girls' health and wellness. And it works beautifully when the parents are able to partner with us, with the school, which many do. It's the most difficult is when there's a real disconnect. Right now, I think what would surprise a lot of people is how deeply impactful the last 15 to 20 years of parsing the research on learning in the brain is actually now is impacting curriculum and the way we teach. That certainly at our school, in the past, a job like mine would be thinking a lot about content, like what are our history courses teaching and what's our math course, and we still think obviously about content, but we start from the position of pedagogy, which is really the philosophy of teaching. And I'm not sure that most people, certainly in this country, based on their K-12 experience, necessarily think about the philosophy of teaching as opposed to the what of what they learned or didn't learn. So, I think that tends to be the most surprising. Probably the other one is that middle school girls are fantastic, and middle school is usually when I tell people that I'm a principal of a middle school, they want to give me sympathy. So that's the fun one, is that middle school girls are fantastic. They are joyful. It is a tremendously vulnerable time, but it's also a wonderful time. So middle school girls rock. There's a lot of different pathways, and probably the pathway that I took is not the standard pathway, in that I graduated from a Jesuit university, very committed to the life of the mind and to also social justice, and earned my doctorate and was planning to be an English professor. But through the process of writing my dissertation, which was a very positive experience, and all of the teaching and administration opportunities that I had while I was in my program, when I came to the end of it, I realized that my greatest passion was teaching, and also writing, but more creative kinds of writing. And so I carried that into becoming an upper school English department chair at an independent school here in the city. But from that time, I really discovered my passion for education and curriculum development and pedagogy and systems thinking and all these different dimensions and education of girls. What I always recommend, because I mentor a lot of people, is don't wait for the title or don't wait for the money. Like if you see a need and something you're passionate about, then go do it, because the path will unfold. For me, from there, I became an upper school division head at another school. Then I came to Hewitt because I very much wanted to be a K-12 English chair. I wanted to learn K-12. Did that, then became the dean across, and then happened to step into middle school because actually there was just a need, and I had done this work before. The traditional pathway would be that you would get your master's degree, ideally in a subject area. Independent schools tend to really value depth in content. A master's of teaching is very valuable, but actually is not required at most independent schools. I have many colleagues who are here who also have doctorates who transition from college teaching to here. Getting experience in the classroom, whatever that looks like, is really key to getting hired in independent schools. And then I think it's a funny field in that being a full-time teacher doesn't necessarily prepare you to be a department chair, which may have people management components, and being a department chair doesn't necessarily prepare you for being a division head. So it's an industry that has not always clear pathways that are built in, like you do X and that prepares you for Y. There's a lot of learning on the job, so I would say being really open to learning all aspects of the school and getting yourself into as many places where you can make a difference is one of the best ways to not only maybe end up in a role like mine, but to be happy in it. I always say education's funny because it's not about promotions the way corporate world is.
If you could say 3 most important qualities that one should have to succeed in your job.
Empathy, a deep ability to empathize, creativity, and a sense of humor. I would say that there are opportunities as educational consultants, and there are opportunities as tutors.
Would you say it's common or it's very rare?
Educational consulting is a huge field, and there are more and more organizations that do all kinds of different consulting, from helping you plan genuine service learning trips around the world to teacher training and development to consultation on an effective board of trustees. The people who become consultants tend to usually have a fair amount of experience. Usually it's folks who maybe decided to stay home for a time with their family. It's also a way that our faculty supplement their income to live in some of our faculty, not all, but some of our early career faculty find that a good way to supplement income to live in a very expensive city. In general, education as an industry is at an enormous turning point, and we're not sure where it's going to go, although there's a camp of us who think it needs to change quite dramatically, because the educational model that we use, K-12 certainly, is one that was designed for the industrial age, and it was over 100 years ago, and it was really designed to provide a uniform experience and a uniform socialization, good citizenship. Things were more standardized, and you were going to become a doctor or a lawyer or work on the factory line or whatever it was. And now our economy has changed so dramatically and so rapidly, and continues in terms of the information age, the information economy, the service economy. We already know that what is needed to thrive in the world today is not always what we're providing our students. The focus in K-12, particularly high schools, is very much around content acquisition as opposed to building habits of mind. And brain research, which is quite compelling now at this point, shows that cramming for tests, for example, people don't remember it. If you don't use it, you lose it. And so we have a system that is really antiquated. And yet schools are notoriously hard to change, because families, all of our adults went through this, all of our parents went through, most of them went through a pretty traditional schooling. And what we're envisioning, and that's really why my role is turning into learning and innovation, we need teachers working more as coaches and guides rather than as the lead. And we need to break down disciplinary silos so that we really can genuinely engage students in interdisciplinary work. And we need to partner more and more with outside organizations, companies, universities. I have a colleague who is older than I am, significantly older, who was a lower school teacher for most of her career. And a few years ago, it didn't seem to be as good a fit anymore for her in our lower school. And so I knew her very well because I used to be the K through 12 English chair and had worked with her on lower school writing curriculum. We had an opportunity that was a very different kind of opportunity for her to take in our middle school, and so she took that. And over the last 3 years, I have just seen such extraordinary growth mindset from this colleague, and I consider her my friend. Her receptivity to feedback, she's someone that we can have real growth-oriented conversations. Her willingness to go out for professional development experiences of all kinds, both ones she finds or one that I suggest. And it's not so easy to do that kind of dramatic career transformation, and even though she's still in education, what she's doing now is so different. I'm grateful to my father, who really believed in the power of girls. My mother, who instilled the value of storytelling. I'm grateful to the Hewitt School that I've been here. This is my 12th year. I feel this is the place that has really provided me the opportunity to grab, if I wanted it, to pursue a fairly unique pathway in education, and they continue to do that. And so I'm grateful to our head of school. My father always would remind me that it's a marathon, not a sprint. When you have a lot of ideas and are passionate and you want things to change tomorrow, and you can get maybe disheartened or disappointed, that always comes back to me, and I use it with kids too and their families when they're in the middle of, the world is ending. Girls sometimes tend to be like, my friend is mad at me and my life is over. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. I'm really worried about environmental sustainability, and very much through a social justice lens. So I would say so not just like climate change, but the issue of, hunger. I mean, how the changing climate is impacting access to food in certain regions, or access to clean water in terms of pollution. So I would say the environmental crisis. I mean, I do worry a lot for young people in terms of the world that we're leaving them.
What's your favorite thing to do in your free time?
Cook.
What's your most favorite country to visit?
Ireland.
What is one thing you cannot live without?
My cats.
What's your favorite book or movie?
I always say my Uber text is the Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne.
What makes you sad?
Injustice and just all the suffering.
What makes you happy?
Laughing with the girls, like watching them just be kids, like watching them really when they can really play, like at recess.
You should get into my profession if
you're passionate about kids and you want to make a difference in young people's lives. If you love kids.
You should not get into my profession if
you only want the summers off. If you're interested in social justice, if you're interested in raising young people who care for themselves and care for the world beyond them, then you should go into education, because we need people in education not only to build those one-to-one relationships with students day to day, we also need activist voices for what education can and should be for all young people, and not just people who perhaps can afford private schools. If you really care about kids and learning in school, and that this is essential to the world today and tomorrow, believe in yourself. It is the most extraordinary journey that one can take.